Good evening. How are you? That was Becha Batchu by Eitan Katz from his Unplugged #2 album. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Wednesday night. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us as we embark on a great little page? It's short, it's going to be a relatively quick class, and there's some beautiful wisdom teachings tonight, including the title of today's show, Are Little White Lies Permitted? We'll get into that. With us today, Karen in Northern California, Stephen in New Hampshire, Bella in Florida. Skipped on me. Renee in Indiana, Melissa in Great Neck, Nancy in North Carolina, Lucy in Minnesota, Sharon in New Jersey, Aoife in Florida. Welcome, everybody. This is Daf Samech, page 65 here in Tractate Yevamos. We're in chapter 6 and concluding chapter 6 tonight. Concluding our discussion of Mishnah number 8 and opening and concluding our discussion of Mishnah number 9. And with that, chapter 6 here in Tractate Yevamos, the 14th volume of the Talmud. We begin at the very bottom of 64b. Continuing our discussion of some laws yesterday, and this idea, when do we establish a chazaka, a presumption, after 2 instances or 3 instances of some negative occurrence? Do we have to make a presumption that it's going to happen again and act accordingly? So a woman, who had 2 husbands die, does a prospective third husband have to be concerned that this has somehow become a woman who buries her husbands? Not because she's done something wrong, she's not being accused of murder, God forbid, but maybe she has a bad muzzle, right? Some kind of bad stars, a bad luck, right? But a consistent bad luck is associated with be causing these husbands to die. In the case of circumcision, if a woman had a baby boy and they circumcised it on the 8th day and it died, perhaps it had a hemophilia type of disease, and then it happened again with a second baby boy, do we now assume that the third baby boy should not be circumcised on the 8th day and perhaps wait till much later? According to the Hazak, after 2 instances, and according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, only after 3 such occurrences, and then we would make that assumption before a 4th time. Okay, so we pick this up at the bottom of 64b. The Gemara identifies the aforementioned law that we were talking about at the end of yesterday. Marriage, when we're talking about establishing a chazaka after 3 occurrences, according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, in other words, we saw that there were instances where we established the chazaka after 2 instances, according to Rebbe, and there are other cases where we establish it after 3 repetitions, according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. And I believe these are the ones where we establish it after 3 occurrences, according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Marriage is referring to that which we said with regard to a woman whose husbands have died. The case of lashings, as we learned in a Mishnah in Tractate Nida on page 63, one who was flogged for transgressing a Torah law, and he repeated the same transgression, and he was flogged again for it. And remember, flogging, just like capital punishment, would only happen from a rabbinic court if the person was warned right before committing the sin in the presence of 2 witnesses or more. If you do that, the punishment for that is such and such, and then the person did it immediately anyway, right? That's when somebody would be flogged. So one who was flogged for transgressing a Torah law, and he repeated the same transgression, and he was flogged again. If he then repeats the sin a 3rd time, then the court places him in a narrow, vaulted chamber, and they feed him barley until his stomach bursts, right? This is a person who is determined to keep transgressing Torah law. and in a Torah society, that would not be tolerated. So once he has sinned and been flogged twice, he has established a presumption of wickedness, and when he sins again, he is caused to die so that he will not continue to sin. The case of set patterns of menstrual bleeding is, as we learned in the Mishna and Tractate Nida, that a woman does not establish a set pattern of menstrual bleeding for herself so that it can be assumed that she will start bleeding at a particular time until she has established it 3 times, right? That she can count like a predictable number of days until her menses will begin, but you have to go through 3 cycles before you can assume that that cycle has some consistency. Similarly, she is not purified from her set pattern until it is uprooted from her 3 times, i.e. until she did not experience menstrual bleeding at the expected time according to her pattern on 3 occasions. Then she would have to conclude that the pattern has changed. And the case of the forewarned ox is, as we learned in a Mishnah in Tractate Bava Kama, page 23b, an ox does not become forewarned until witnesses testify that it has gored a victim 3 times, 3 different victims, or it caused damages 3 different times. Consequently, in the cases of set patterns and a forewarned ox, a legal presumption is created only after 3 occurrences, not after 2, and this is in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. We are on 65a now. The sages taught if a woman was married to her first husband and she did not have children, and then she was married to her second husband and she did not have children, she may not get married to a third husband unless it is to one who has already, it is to a husband who already has children, and thus he has already fulfilled the mitzvah to be fruitful and multiply, as it is presumed that she is unable to have children. So if a man is still obligated in the mitzvah to be peru urevu, to be fruitful and multiply, to have kids, and the law is that he needs to have a boy and a girl until he has fulfilled that. He has not fulfilled that until he has had a viable boy and a girl that survive. And so if he still needs to do that, he shouldn't marry a woman who was married to a husband for 10 years and didn't have kids, was married to another husband for 10 years and didn't have kids. So this guy who's looking to have kids should probably look for a different wife than this particular woman. Now, if she got married to one who does not have children and he had been unaware of her presumptive status, so then she is divorced without receiving payment for her marriage contract, as he married her in error. A dilemma was raised before the sages. If she was married to a third husband and she did not have children for 10 years, what is the law with regard to whether those first husbands can demand the return of the money that they paid for her marriage contract? Can they say to her, right, because they couldn't say to her, they had to pay off the ketubah, right? So that was one of the first rights that women got in the world in ancient patriarchal societies, that under Torah law, a woman gets a ketubah, right? And so if a husband divorces her, he has to give her a marriage settlement. You can imagine that in the ancient world, they didn't have that until the sages came along and established it. So if they divorced because they didn't have kids after 10 years, the husband couldn't say, well, I'm not going to pay you the amount of the marriage settlement because you're infertile, because maybe he was infertile. But if she went through 3 different husbands and didn't have children with any one of the 3 different guys, now it would certainly look like she was the one that was infertile. So now these first husbands come back and say, well, I want my money back because I paid you a marriage settlement that I wouldn't have paid otherwise. That's their question. Can they make this claim and receive? Can they say to her, it has been revealed retroactively that it was you who caused our inability to have children, and therefore we entered our marriages in error? Or perhaps she can say to them, well, it is now that I am older that I have become weak, but in my youth I could have had children with a different husband. Maybe it's you that I couldn't have a child with. And the sages answer, it is reasonable that she can say to them, it is now that I have become weak or infertile, is what that means. And so she will not refund the marriage settlement to either of those first 2 husbands. Another dilemma was raised before the sages. If she was married to a 4th husband, and then she did have children with him, so what is the law with regard to whether she can demand the payment of her marriage contract from her 3rd husband? right? So the third husband didn't have to pay the marriage settlement, but now she then marries a fourth and does have children with him. Maybe she has now proven that it was never her that she was the problem, so she should go back to that third husband and say, pay me the marriage settlement that you bilked me of before. Can she say this is the question. What is the law with regard to whether she can demand the payment of her marriage contract from the third by claiming that it is now evident that she was capable of having children? And the Gemara answers, we say to her, your silence is preferable to your speech, i.e., you are better off not making this claim. As the third husband can say to her, I did not divorce you with this understanding, and now that I know that you are capable of having children, I regret divorcing you. And this would invalidate her divorce, and consequently her marriage to her fourth husband would also be invalidated, and this would render her child a mamzer. Now, this is like a condition on a condition. This would never happen in the real world. She received a get that she could rely on, and then she had a proper marriage with the fourth husband. But they're telling her, basically let the past be, trying to open that can of worms and revisit the terms of that marriage settlement after the third marriage, could create more problems for you than it would solve in getting that settlement. Now, Rav Papa strongly objects to that argument. If she was silent, do we remain silent? If there is room for concern that the divorce might be invalid, well, then the concern exists regardless of her claim, and therefore the bill of divorce should be found invalid, and her children from her fourth husband would be rendered mamzers. Rather, we say that it is now that she has become healthy. In other words, she was previously incapable of bearing children, but she has since recovered from that disability. So the way the other marriages ended is the way they ended, and thank God she has children with the fourth husband, and we should all celebrate that. So the Gemara addresses a related case. If he said that the cause for their failure to have children is from her, i.e., it is she who was infertile, and she said it is from him that he was infertile, so Rabbi Ami said, with regard to such matters between him and her, she is believed. Right? Interesting. Like if they're arguing about why they're getting a divorce and what the terms of the divorce should be, and now they're fighting with each other, and she is saying the reason that we couldn't have kids is because he is infertile, and the husband is saying the reason we couldn't have kids is because she is infertile. In that he said, she said situation, we believe her, say the sages. What is the reason for this ruling? She is certain whether his semen shoots like an arrow, whereas he is not certain whether his semen shoots like an arrow. Meaning that, if he ejaculates forcefully, he's much more likely to get his wife pregnant than if he doesn't. So if he says, I will go and marry a different woman and examine myself to see if I am indeed the cause. In that case, Rabbi Ami said, even in this case, he must divorce his first wife and give her the payment for her marriage contract, as I say that whoever marries a woman, in addition to his first wife, must divorce his first wife and give her the payment for her marriage contract. Conversely, Rava said that a man may marry several women in addition to his first wife, and there's nothing wrong with this practice so long as he has enough money to support them all properly. Now, you could see that there was even a debate on this subject. Can a man have multiple wives, even in the times of the Gemara, so prior to about the year 500 of the Common Era, and about 500 years after that came Rabbeinu Gershom, who said, that's it. No more multiple spouses. Jewish men cannot have more than one wife, and that has been the law ever since. For sure, in Ashkenazic communities, there seems like there was some wiggle room in Sephardic communities, but you will not really find an actual case in the real world, probably anywhere in the world now, and probably not for the last 1,000 years, of men having multiple wives. Now we're on 65b. The Gemara addresses another case in which the court forces a man to divorce his wife who has not had children after 10 years. If he said, you miscarried within the 10 years of our marriage, and since less than 10 years have elapsed since that time, I should not have to divorce you. And she said, I did not miscarry. In that case, Rabbi Ami says, even in this case, we believe her. Because if it is so that she miscarried, she would not establish herself as barren through denying his claim. Right? It's better for her that she became pregnant and happened to miscarry than that she never became pregnant in the 10 years. So if she says the reason we didn't have kids is because I never got pregnant in the last 10 years, we believe her. If she miscarried and then miscarried again and then miscarried again, she has been established to be a woman who is prone to miscarriages. And her husband should divorce her so that he can have children with another woman. If he said she miscarried twice and she said it occurred 3 times, Rabbi Yitzhak ben Elazar said there was an incident of this kind that was adjudicated in the study hall, and they said that we believe her, because if it is so that she had not miscarried a 3rd time, she would not establish herself as one who is prone to miscarriages. And that's a general principle that we'll encounter again in Tractate Sanhedrin, that when a witness testifies in a manner that implicates him or herself, we believe them, because why would somebody offer testimony that is harmful to himself or herself if it weren't because it's true? Mishnah number 9, the final Mishnah here in chapter 6. A man is commanded with regard to the mitzvah to be fruitful and multiply. We've gone over this principle several times, and now it is the subject of its own Mishnah. A man is commanded with regard to the mitzvah to be fruitful and multiply. Peru urevu. But not a woman. A woman is not commanded to be fruitful and multiply. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka says that a woman is commanded, as the verse states with regard to both of them, Genesis 1:28, and God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. So Yochanan ben Baroka reads from that both men and women are obligated, but his is the minority opinion, preserved even in the Mishnah, but the majority opinion, which became the halacha, the law, is that only men are obligated. The reasoning is not given here, but I've mentioned that we had that reasoning elsewhere, that women are endangered in childbirth, and so that's why they're not commanded to get pregnant and give birth to children. If they choose not to, they don't have to. But men are obligated. Why? Because God did not create the world to be empty, right? He created it to be inhabited, and so that there will be another generation of humans, we have to reproduce. Okay. From where are these matters derived, that a woman is not obligated in the mitzvah to be fruitful and multiply? Rabbi Elias said, in the name of Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, the verse states, be fruitful and multiply and fill the land and conquer it. Genesis 1:28. Now, it is the manner of a man to conquer, and it is not the manner of a woman to conquer. Consequently, it is evident that the entire command, including the mitzvah to be fruitful and multiply, was given only to men and not to women. Now, we all know that there are incredibly tough and deadly women warriors, right? There are plenty of men, who try to, engage in, activities and attributes that are considered more the realm of women. But if you're going to make kind of, broad, really broad, obviously with a gazillion exceptions, but if you're going to make broad stereotypes, and if you just watch children grow up, you're going to see that little girls growing up tend to be more interested in relationships and in people, and in forming relationships and the status of relationships and who's doing what with who. And that boys are over there in the mud pile, trying to put something together, and with the frustration. Obviously, there's girls who do that, and there's boys who do this. But here, the sages are saying that it is the nature of males to go out and conquer. And since this idea of go out and conquer the land was given as a command, that would be associated with a command in the same verse that applies to men, is the argument that's being made by Rabbi Ilya. Now, the Gemara raises a difficulty. On the contrary, says the Gemara, the plural term, and conquer it, vechivshucha, indicates that the two of them are included. Both male and female are commanded to conquer the land. And Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, it is written in the Torah without the letter Vav so that it can be read and conquer it, vechivsha, in the singular. And Rav Yosef said the proof is from here, and God said to him, I am God Almighty, be fruitful and multiply, parei urevei, in Genesis 35:11. There it is given in the singular, and it does not state, be fruitful and multiply, peru urevu, in the plural, right? So peru urevu is the way that the commandment was given the first time it was given to the animals as well as the humans, but in Genesis it's given again in the singular, and so that would seem to indicate that it is a mitzvah obligating men, but women, obviously women need to participate in being fruitful and multiply. If men are going to fulfill that commandment, women are obviously permitted and encouraged to be fruitful and multiply, but they're not obligated if they choose not to. The Gemara cites other statements made by Rabbi Ilya. Now that we've mentioned some teachings of Rabbi Ilya, we're going to take a short digression on other teachings of Rabbi Ilya, and here are some classic wisdom teachings from the Talmud. I'm sure you've heard several of these before. And Rabbi Ilya said, in the name of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, just as it is a mitzvah for a person to say that which will be heeded, so is it a mitzvah for a person not to say that which will not be heeded. One should not rebuke those who will be unreceptive to his message. And Rabbi Abba says it is obligatory for him to refrain from speaking. As it is stated, do not reprove a scorner lest he hate you. Reprove a wise man and he will love you. Proverbs 9:8. Now that's one we could just pause for a second, especially since it's a short daf, and let that sink in, right? Sometimes you feel like you're beating your head against the wall, trying to, advocate for an idea that people are just not listening to. And then you say to yourself, okay, yeah, but at least I did my job. At least I did my job. At least I told them the truth. And if they're not willing to listen, that's their problem. And there might be situations where that's appropriate. But on the other hand, a reason that we don't want to rebuke a scorner, and that we want to sort of save rebuke for people that will be open to it at least a little bit. Maybe they're not ready to change their behavior right now, but they're still going to be open to hearing our feedback, as it were, is because in the case of the scorner, whatever you're trying to tell him, he's actually hardening himself or herself against it. You're going backwards trying to teach that person at that moment. In the same way that we don't, try to teach a lesson about why people live and die to a mourner at a shiva. That is not an appropriate time. They're not scorners, but that is not a time when that teaching will be heard. It will be rejected. It's just an inappropriate time for that. And so we also have a teaching elsewhere that we should, sort of modify and mold our teachings according to the student. So you really have to think when you're advocating for any kind of a position or trying to transfer information, especially if the information is important, if the education you're trying to give is important, you've got to be listening and looking for the cues of the person that you're trying to reach and see, are they open to it? Do you have a little bit of a crack in the door so that they will hear you? And if you don't, then, is the time to shut up. So Rabbi Ilya further said, in the name of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, it is permitted for a person to depart from the truth in a matter that will bring peace, as it is stated. So here Rabbi Ilya is saying in the name of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, that the little white lie is permitted. Now elsewhere we've seen that this was a debate between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai, much more machmir, much more stringent. They say you should never tell a lie of any sort. Better you should just be quiet. And Beis Hillel said there is times, and that is the law, that there are times when you're going to bend or stretch or even tell a lie for the sake of peace. Classic example, you always tell the groom at a wedding that the bride is so beautiful, right? That you would never not say that. Okay, so why is it that we are allowed to depart from the truth in a matter that will bring peace? As it is stated, Genesis chapter 50, your father commanded before he died, saying, so shall you say to Joseph, please pardon your brother's crime, etc. Right? So the brothers, Joseph's brothers, who sold him into slavery, and then later he said to them, don't worry about it. God sent me to Egypt ahead of you so that I could preserve us and the whole world from the famine. It was all by God's design. I don't hold you responsible. We're good, right? And the brothers knew how wickedly they had acted in selling their own brother into slavery after actually contemplating that they would kill him. And they said, well, he's being very kind and magnanimous and forgiving us, but maybe what he means is he's not going to harm us while our father is alive because he knows how much pain it would cause Jacob, and he loves Jacob so much. But now that Jacob has died, maybe now he's going to exact his revenge on us. So they said to Joseph, our father, your father, our father said, pardon your brothers. He said that on his deathbed. Jacob said no such thing. But they were saying, this is a little bit self-preservational, okay, but still they were saying for the sake of peace in the family, our father said, stick with your original promise to pardon us. Jacob never issued this command, but his sons falsely attributed this statement to him in order to preserve the peace between them and Joseph. Rabbi Nassan says, it is a mitzvah to depart from the truth in order to preserve peace, as it is stated, and Samuel said, how can I go? And Saul will hear and kill me. In 1 Samuel 16:2, God responded in the next verse that Samuel should say he went to sacrifice an offering, indicating that God commanded one to lie in order to preserve the peace. Right? So God told Samuel, the prophet Samuel, to tell a falsehood that would get back to King Saul in order to spare the problem of Saul trying to kill Samuel. And it was taught in the school of Rabbi Yishmael, great is peace, as even the Holy One himself departed from the truth for it. As initially it is written that Sarah said of Abraham, and my Lord is old, right? In the instance when the three angels came to visit Abraham, and he fed them, etc. And then they told him and Sarah that a year later they would have a child, right? And Abraham is 100 years old and Sarah is 90 years old. And these strangers are saying, you're going to have a child in a year. And Sarah laughed, right? And why did she laugh? Well, what she said was, and my Lord is old. Abraham is too old to father a child. And in the end, it is written that God told Abraham that Sarah said, and I am old, that I, Sarah, am old, right? So God knows exactly what Sarah said, and yet sort of changed the story when reporting it to Abraham so that, he wouldn't say to Abraham, hey, your wife thinks you're old, She thinks she's old. Okay, that's just a little bit of humility. If she's accusing her husband of being too old to father children, that could be something that drives a little bit of a wedge between husband and wife. And so God changed the story. God adjusted Sarah's words in order to spare Abraham's hurt feelings that might lead Abraham and Sarah to quarrel. We go back to our Mishnah about the obligation to be fruitful and multiply. It is taught in the Mishnah that Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka says that women are also included in the mitzvah to be fruitful and multiply. It was stated that two Amoraim, rabbis of the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, disagreed concerning this matter. One said that the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka, that women are obligated in Peru Uruvu. And one said that the halacha is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka. The Gemara comments conclude that it was Rabbi Yochanan who said that the law is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka, as Rabbi Abahu sat and said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka. And then Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi, who were sitting across from him, turned their faces away as a subtle but clear indication that they disagreed with this report of Rabbi Yochanan's opinion, meaning that Rabbi Yochanan must have said that the law is not in accordance with Yochanan ben Baroka, and therefore that women are not obligated in Peru Urevu. But they did not want to explicitly contradict Rabbi Abahu out of respect for him. And some say a different version of the incident, that it was Rabbi Chia bar Abba who said this statement, and Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi turned their faces. Now, Rav Papa analyzed this and said, granted, according to the one who said that Rabbi Abahu misreported Rabbi Yochanan's opinion, it makes sense that Rabbi Asi and the rabbis Ami and Asi did not want to, contradict Rabbi Abahu due to the honor of Caesar's court, where Rabbi Abahu maintained close ties. So they didn't want to say anything to him, and they merely hinted at their disagreement. However, according to the opinion of the one who said that Rabbi Chia bar Abba misreported Rabbi Yochanan's position on this law, well, then they would have said it to him explicitly. They're not in awe of Rabbi Chia bar Abba. And so if he misreported Rabbi Yochanan's opinion, they would have said, no, you got Rabbi Yochanan's opinion wrong. So in any event, it is clear that according to Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi, Rabbi Yochanan disagreed with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka. So the Gemara asks, what conclusion was reached about this issue? And the Gemara suggests, come in here. As Rabbi Acha bar Chanina said, that Rabbi Abahu said, that Rabbi Asi said. There was an incident that came before Rabbi Yochanan in the synagogue of Caesarea, involving a woman who wanted a divorce from her husband after 10 years of childless marriage. And he said that the husband must divorce her and give her the payment for her marriage contract. Right? So they didn't have kids. Now, we've been saying that a man can divorce a woman because he's obligated to be fruitful and multiply. They haven't had kids in 10 years, so that's a cause for divorce. And then he can go marry someone else so he can fulfill the mitzvah. But here, a woman came to Rabbi Yochanan and said, I've been married to this man for 10 years. We haven't had kids. He won't give me the divorce, but I want a divorce from him because I want to move on. Now, and Rabbi Yochanan granted it. Right? So the woman came before Rabbi Yochanan in the synagogue of Caesarea. She wanted a divorce from her husband after 10 years of childless marriage. And he said the husband must divorce her and give her the payment for her marriage contract. Now, if it enters your mind to say that she is not commanded to be fruitful and multiply, what is payment for a marriage contract doing here? Why does she have a right to demand to be divorced and to receive the payment of her ketubah, which normally would be given only when the husband decides unilaterally to divorce her? The Gemara responds, perhaps that was in a case where she came to demand a divorce due to another claim. Not that she wanted to fulfill the obligation to be fruitful and multiply, but rather she wanted children for a reason other than that fulfillment of the mitzvah to be fruitful and multiply. And since this claim has merit, her husband must divorce her and pay her the marriage contract. And this is like the case of a certain woman who came before Rabbi Ami. And she requested a divorce due to her husband's inability to father children. She said to her husband, give me payment for my marriage contract. He said to her, go away. You are not commanded to be fruitful and multiply, and you have no right to demand a divorce. She said to him, in my old age, what will be with this woman? I.e., if I have no children, who will take care of me when I grow old? Rabbi Ami said, in a situation such as this, we certainly force the husband to divorce her and pay her marriage contract. So it's not that her claim is, I need to fulfill the mitzvah of Peru Urevu. Rather, her claim is, we aren't having kids together, and I'm worried that when I grow old, I won't have children to take care of me. And that's a valid claim and a basis for divorce, even in a society where the husband had only the husband could choose to initiate a divorce, but she can initiate the divorce in the rabbinic court with this claim. And the Gemara relates a similar incident. A certain woman came before Rav Nachman and requested a divorce due to her husband's inability to father children. He said to her, "You are not commanded to be fruitful and multiply." She said to him, "Does this woman not require a staff for her hand and a hoe for her burial?" In other words, the woman said that she wanted children so that they could care for her in her old age and bury her when she would die. And Rav Nachman said, in a case such as this, we force the husband to grant her the divorce. The Gemara relates that Rabbi Chia's sons, Yehuda and Chizkiah, were twins, but one of them was fully developed after 9 months of pregnancy, and one was fully developed at the beginning of the 7th month, and they were born 2 months apart. I mean, that's fascinating. And there's a note here. Although rare, it is possible for twins to be born at different times, occasionally with a significant interval between the births. There have been documented cases of the birth of twins separated by a gap of over 50 days and even up to 85 days. Okay. So this happened to Rabbi Chia. Now remember that Rabbi Chia, we learned yesterday, he got a lot of aggravation from his wife. She just would never give him what he wanted and always just contradicted him in everything. And yet, she took good care of him and made the food and took good care of the kids, and he honored her for it always and gave her gifts regularly. Okay, so now she experienced this terrible pain of twins being born 2 months apart, almost 3 months apart. So Yehudit, and that was her name. Very often the wives of sages aren't named, but she is Yehudit, or more Ashkenaz pronunciation, Yehudis. So Yehudis, the wife of Rabbi Chia, had acute birthing pain from these unusual deliveries. She changed her clothes to prevent Rabbi Chia from recognizing her, and she came before Rabbi Chia, pretending to be a random woman and not his wife, to ask him a halachic question. And she said, "Is a woman commanded to be fruitful and multiply?" And he said to her, "No." So she went and drank an infertility potion. Eventually the matter was revealed, and Rabbi Chia found out about what Yehudis had done. And he said to her, "If only you had given birth to one more belly for me, i.e. another set of twins." As the master said, Yehuda and Chizkiah were twin brothers and both became prominent Torah scholars. And the other set of twins that Yehudis had were daughters, Pazi and Tavi. And Rabbi Chia's daughters were twin sisters who became the matriarchs of families of distinguished Torah scholars. And so since all 4 children, created many Torah scholars, he would have preferred to have yet another set of kids. But she took that infertility potion. And again, this proves that women are not obligated. They can choose not to have children if they don't want to. And the Gemara asks, are women not commanded to be fruitful and multiply? The same question asked again. Didn't Rav Achabar Rav Katina say that Rabbi Yitzhak said there was an incident with a certain woman who was half slave and half free woman, and therefore could marry neither a Canaanite slave nor a Jew? By the way, I'm almost done, so if you have questions or comments, get them in. And so because she was half slave and half free, she could not marry a slave nor a Jew. She was a Jewish woman who was half slave and half free. So she can't marry a Jewish man because she's half slave, and she can't marry a slave because she's half free. Presumably the reason the court forced her master to free her was so that she could fulfill the mitzvah to be fruitful and multiply. But Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said the reason they forced her master to free her was not so she could perform the mitzvah of be fruitful and multiply. Rather, they freed her because others treated her in a loose manner. Since she knew that she could not marry, she engaged in promiscuous activity, and the court forced her master to free her so that she would be free to get married and put her, her promiscuous days behind her. Okay, that concludes chapter 6. Tomorrow we'll move on to chapter 7. We're going to get back to the various ramifications of marriage among the priests, and who they can marry and who they can't, and what implications are when they marry somebody that they're not supposed to marry. We've started to discuss that in the past, but we're going to get a little bit deeper starting tomorrow. And what's interesting about the cases involving priests is that by definition, there's very small percentage of the Jewish people that those laws apply to, right? Only the descendants of Moses' brother Aaron are Kohanim. And so it's just another example of where the Gemara and the Mishnah will spend, quality time on problems that are completely impractical and irrelevant for the vast majority of the Jewish people, and obviously, in terms of the non-Jewish population, completely irrelevant to them. But they create interesting cases, even in extreme hypothetical situations that wouldn't even happen in the priest's world, but create interesting questions of law, and we'll embark on that with chapter 7 tomorrow. All right, let's check questions or comments. On Yevamos 65. Aoife, how is it possible that a woman's prior husband can revoke their divorce after she has remarried? I think what they were saying there is the guy could argue that simply to set up the rebuttal that, no, we're never going to do that. And there's various reasons why they're not going to do that. And the primary reason is that if somehow this divorce, which was a valid divorce when it was given and accepted, etc., and which freed the woman to go marry some other guy, and they had a proper marriage, and then they had kids, and now you're going to say that first divorce was somehow invalid and render the next marriage and those children momsers? That would be a calamity. A calamity. And so the sages will find any means possible, and particularly a good logical argument to, get us completely away from that situation. Sharon, there is therefore the ability for someone to be declared a mamzer retroactively seems really unfair to the child. And again, I think they would really move mountains before they would do such a thing. It would be, such a disaster. Now, I guess what could happen is that, there was a divorce given that was truly an inappropriate divorce, and they didn't consult with any kind of rabbinic authority, and then she went off and married someone else. And it was a total, they broke the law in giving and receiving that divorce, and therefore the subsequent marriage was invalid. Now, that's such a disaster that's one of those cases where you would go to the most competent rabbinic authority who would, move halachic mountains to find a way to instate that divorce, and so that the subsequent marriage and the children, would be qualified and legal. That's what they would look for. And, let's just hope that never happens to anyone we know or anyone, period. Aoife, how can you know someone will be open to rebuke until you rebuke them? I think that when you're talking about, if you don't know whether they're open to rebuke or not, then the door's cracked open and there's a chance that they will listen to it. And, and you should, first of all, do it very privately and very gently. Like we learn with our young kids, right? With the compliment sandwich. You did such and such so well. It was really inspiring to watch you. It's possible that you could do such and such a little differently. But, even in the absence of that change, it's just amazing to watch you, do it, whatever, the compliment sandwich. I think where you have reason to believe the person is a scoffer is because you've seen them reject rebuke on numerous occasions in the past, and that would be a person that there's no point in rebuking again. So it's a good question, Aoife. Sharon, how can men be obligated and women not when a man cannot fulfill the mitzvah in isolation from a woman? A mitzvah that involves two parties, it seems, we cannot obligate only one of the two. As Leonard Nimoy, may his memory be for a blessing, would say, this is illogical. But think about it. A man needs a woman to procreate. Absolutely. And that's why he should get married. And elsewhere here, there was a note that even if a woman can't have children, she should get married also, because it's good to be married. And there's just a lot of good that flows out of being in a married state. But what they're saying is if a woman chooses not to have children, she hasn't violated a mitzvah. This is like there's many cases like this where we see, okay, there's a distinction made between the sexes, or the distinction made between, priests and Levites, or Levites and Israelites, or a distinction made between, the Torah revels in distinctions, right? We are not all the same. We are not all obligated in the same way. People in different professions actually have different obligations of frequency of lovemaking for their wife, etc. And people are just classified into all different kinds of distinctions. To the modern ear, it's like everybody's the same. Everybody's equal. How can you say men are obligated and women are not obligated? That's unfair to women. But the flip side of that is if a woman chooses not to have children, she hasn't done anything wrong. That is a valid choice that she can make. And the reasoning was given elsewhere that it's dangerous to go through childbirth. And some women might really fear that, and maybe it's the daughter of a woman who died, giving birth to her. And, has never had a birth mom because of that. And, so she's afraid that if she was to have children, it might kill her. And so she chooses not to have children. But men don't have that choice, right? They are obligated. Now, they might do everything that they can, and they just, for whatever reason, were not fated to have children. It's not that they're going to be, held accountable for that in heaven. It's like God decided they're not going to have kids. But the man is obligated to keep trying until he has fulfilled that obligation, and women are not obligated. I didn't make it up. I'm just reporting what it says here. Ifa, is it allowed for a woman to sterilize herself? It's such a good question. It seems that is exactly what Yehudis did, right? Rabbi Chia's wife did that. She didn't want to go through the pain of having, she had 2 sets of twins, and it caused her tremendous pain and anxiety, I think physical pain, and she didn't want to go through it again. She asked her husband, as a halakhic authority, without revealing to him that it was her doing the asking, is a woman obligated to be fruitful and multiply? No, she's not. And so she drank an infertility potion, which sterilized her. Now, the reason I'm pausing to say, is that permitted, is because for sure we're not allowed to castrate, right? So we're not allowed to castrate neither animals nor humans, right? To create a eunuch is a sin. It's an aveira, and that's a different transgression than violating the positive mitzvah to be fruitful and multiply. Castrating a man also violates a separate negative prohibition that you're not allowed to castrate. Now, I know that that's true for males, and I'm not sure if that same negative prohibition not to castrate would also apply to women not to sterilize themselves, not to have their tubes tied, so that kind of thing. I don't know. I'd have to look it up. I'm sure the question can be Googled pretty easily, but I don't know it offhand. But as you can see, there can be different prohibitions or positive commandments involved in the same action, and that would be an example of that. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. Tomorrow we turn the page and move into chapter 7 and get a little bit away from these questions of sexuality and more into different questions revolving around marriage, but not necessarily around intercourse. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got. Have a great night.